Let's see. It says this video has been removed by the uploader. I have no idea what's going on.
Let me see.
It says we've started.
We'll check.
Says this video has been removed.
Yes, we are live. Awesome, awesome. All right. Thank you all. Sorry, some technical difficulties. Thank you. Hello, good afternoon, and welcome to Revolution Within the Revolution, episode 3. We are excited to have all of you join us for today's show. Before we get into the program today and some updates on Cuba, we wanted to introduce ourselves. My name is Urmia Fanayan. I am a socialist and trans liberation organizer here in Washington, D.C., the center of the belly of the beast. I am a member of the Action for Cuba committees and the National Network on Cuba, and a part of various other anti-imperialist organizations. And I am one of your co-hosts. Jasenia, I now pass it to you.
Thank you so much. My name is Jasenia Jasmine. My pronouns are she, they, and I am also an organizer here in the belly of the beast. I am a Pan-Africanist, a Pan-Caribbeanist, and a lot of the organizing that I do is in line with liberation movements, but also in uplifting the impoverished and the working class. And I organized with a couple of anti-imperialist socialist organizations, such as the Anti-Imperialist Network, Compas de la Diaspora. Also, I'm an organizer with the NYNJ Action for Cuba Committee, which is, as Comrade Armia said, a working group of the National Network on Cuba. And I also organize with our comrades in the NNOC and Mayday Brigade. And I'm super excited to be here with all of y'all. And please excuse the technical difficulties, but we are here nonetheless. So that is the most important thing, mashallah. And Comrade Onye previously was on the call and was with us for a little bit, but won't be able to join us for today's segment, but will be with us, inshallah, next week. And we'll talk a bit more about what we'll be talking about next week, later on in the show. But I'll pass to Comrade Armia to get us started with our grounding for today's episode.
Inshallah, indeed. So comrades, on today's program, we are going to be bringing in compa of ours who was a part of the Nuestra América Convoy to Cuba this past week, Cheryl from the National Network on Cuba. Comrade Cheryl is the co-chair of the National Network and has been engaged in Cuba solidarity work for decades now. She has just returned from the island as a part of hundreds of U.S. activists engaged in protest against the inhumane blockade. So we'll hear more from her later in the show. We will also be discussing some updates on Cuba and solidarity action items that are coming out of the movement at this current moment. So moving on to what has happened with Cuba this past week. Cuba's energy crisis continues to exacerbate as a result of the heightened U.S. sanctions. Blackouts have only become worse and have started to last for longer periods of time. The extreme blackouts are something the Cuban people have faced since the very beginning of the blockade, but we've witnessed them at a magnitude much higher these past couple of weeks than we have before. In addition to the blackouts, we are witnessing impacts on all aspects of Cuban people's lives, including healthcare. It is no secret that Cuba has one of the most advanced healthcare systems and medical innovation in the world, right? A core tenet of the Cuban Revolution has been to make medical education and access to doctors more available than any other country in the world, not just for the Cuban people, but for the entire international community. Cuba sends doctors on medical missions to every continent on this planet and has welcomed students from the entire global South and the entire global North to the Latin American School of Medicine, where they study for completely free. The blockade, however, has made their humanity-first healthcare system incredibly difficult by not allowing proper supplies and fuel to reach the island. This past week, hospitals reported ventilators being shut off for patients that were in dire need of them. Doctors reported they aren't able to get formula to newborn babies, and ambulances have been completely shut off. And yes, all of these consequences were a direct result of a policy decision made by the United States. Nonetheless, Cuba says they are still prepared for any attacks from the US that may come their way. And a new generation of young communists on the island released statements this past week saying this is their modern day Bay of Pigs, and they will not back down. They are steady in their resistance. They are steady in defending their revolution. Comrade Jasenia, I now turn to you. I'm going to ask you, what are some of the goals that Trump has with these continued attacks?
I mean, we can never be too sure what goes on in the mind of that maniacal and evil man. But as we see with like the ongoing, attempts to unite the far right leaders, puppet leaders in Latin America, in Africa, and in Asia and all these parts where reactionaries are tending to come together to try to crush, the revolutionary spirit of the people, which are very futile attempts. I think that that's something that highlights one of the goals of Trump by attempting to build alliances with these far right reactionary forces. And it's in a bid to attempt to impose and enforce the Donroe Doctrine, the goals of that, of imposing, U.S. Imperialist hegemony into the region to gain control of, natural resources that is out of, the means of what it is to actually engage in participation and friendship with other nations to be able to establish trade relations. As we know, historically speaking, the United States has never had this into their practice. Washington has never taken this route of asking and engaging in respectful dialogue with nations to be able to accomplish and build these relationships. It's always been something that's been by force, through manipulation, and also causing and employing fear-mongering tactics to break the will of people, to have them go against, the interests of their nation, but also in upholding the duty of internationalism, of being in respect with one another. And yeah, so I think that long-winded answer, but I think most of the goal is to continue enforcing, violence, exploitation, to get unregulated capital, and just build the wealth of his associates who are part of the Epstein class, and continue to keep humanity in a permanent war economy, where they are the only ones that benefit, and their benefit comes from our suffering. But as we see and as we know, this is something that they're never going to accomplish, because they will never break the will of the people, and we're never going to, hand over the entrusted lands and tools of the earth that has been entrusted to us by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So we see this as being a very futile goal that the Trump administration and dictatorship has in mind.
Yes, indeed. And, just yesterday actually was the second illegitimate hearing of President Maduro after he was captured alongside first combatant Cirio Flores. So I think we also have to recognize the fact that this is, not just an attack on Cuba, but the United States sees the Caribbean as their personal playground. We have to remember that before the Batista, when the Batista dictatorship was in power, the island of Cuba was used as a place to money launder and have personal resorts of the United States, and was polluted by sex tourists who would go there and exploit Cuban women. And I think this is a part of the story that sometimes isn't brought into connection within mainstream media as to what the attacks on Cuba are really looking like. It's really wanting to go back to these backwards ways that doesn't see the Cuban people as human and doesn't see the Cuban people as people who should deserve their own sovereignty in deciding how they should take over their own fate and their own future. So I also want to ask you, Jasenia, what are some of the calls that are coming from the Cuban people on how those of us in the belly of the beast should fight back against these attacks?
Yeah, it's, our Cuban comrades are always asking that we like amplify the message of standing very firmly against imperialism and the encroaching, attacks and aggressions that come whenever the imperialists try to, revert the progression of the revolution back to a time, as you just highlighted, where they had control over a puppet dictatorship to just hold control over, in this case, Cuba's sugar industry. And as we see that this is something that they continuously are employing in other nations in reference to Venezuela after the illegal kidnapping of Maduro and Celia Flores. It's to control their oil industry. So I think one of the biggest ask is to continue educating people within the belly of the beast as to the realities of what's happening, what are the actual, objectives of the empire, Washington, as we know them, and essentially engaging in compassionate conversations with those who don't know as much, right? Because if we engage with educating people when they're coming out of the ignorance that is imposed on them by the enemy, then it makes it difficult for them to be able to have that socialist transformation that we so desperately want. So I think the biggest ask, as always, is being a teacher and a student, and engaging in a very disciplined, militant manner of bringing about this education and speaking truth to power, but also holding on to the compassion, because we see this is the nature of our Cuban comrades of, still being kind, and willing to engage in dialogue as long as it's respectful and built on mutual understanding. So I think that's a huge ask that our comrades have asked of us, because this is a homework that is all across organizational wise, organizers, and just people within the belly of the beast, and whether it be like doing teach-ins, or whether it be like amplifying on social media, doing film screenings, engaging in like cultural, where we're uplifting like Afro and Indigenous like cultural practices. Like these are things that we can do to continue engaging in conversation and community with one another, but also finding a way for them not to take away the spirit and the joy that we have in being able to bring about another world through this transformation. So yeah, I think that those are the best ways that we can fight for now, since we're engaging in terms of dialogue. And then when the time comes to explore other means, to just be ready. And that comes with, training and educating one another as well.
And I think you mentioned, just a really important part, which was that we need to be disciplined, and we need to be militant, and we need to be in the streets, right? We need to constantly engage in struggle, because the Cuban people are demanding it of us, right? They're asking us, those of you who are in the imperial core, like, you guys have a duty to engage in dialogue with your people, to struggle through these ideas with your people. So tell us, I know, so the response that came from yesterday's trial, a sham hearing on President Maduro's kidnapping. What has the response been like from organizers here in the US? What are people doing? What are some of the things that we're hearing from activists and community members across the country?
Yeah, I think that there has been like an unrelenting, wave of solidarity, very disciplined and militant, as you say, like those of us that are able to go out to the streets, like we've been able to do that. Organizers have been holding down, the line with making sure that that attention is called to the fact that the usage of legalism as a tactic to impose an illegal detention against a democratically elected president who was kidnapped by the imperialist forces of the United States, is deciding to hold two hearings to determine whether a president is able to return to back to his country, or if he should be, face prison here in the United States, which is outside of their jurisdiction. And in all means, because this is something that should come from the Venezuelan people themselves to decide if their president, is equipped to govern the nation or not. And as we see with the massive protests that have happened here in the United States in support of the rallies that are happening in Venezuela, where the militant Venezuelan people are defending the Bolivian revolution and are calling for their president to be returned back to them, and the first combatant to be returned back to them. We see that this is in unity, right? That the voice of the people of Venezuela, those who are not, I think Venezuelan call them cuipambiles, like the equivalents of like gusanos, vende patrias. It's in line with the voice of the youth, with the voice of elders, with revolutionaries, with comrades, with people who know that everyday people, the working class, who know that this is a complete injustice and unfairness, and is just a continual tactic of the imperialists. It's entwined, right? So we know that once the voice of the youth come into, playing a part in leading to a direction, it's always because it's the truth, right? And when we see elders standing side by side, organizers, as we saw yesterday, with those who were there, and then also media that's coming out to, amplify the message, we're walking side by side. So if we continue to do that, then our enemy stands no chance in, achieving their means of, again, breaking the spirit, but also breaking the resolve, that justice and peace will be achieved, and that Presidente Nicolás Maduro and first combatant Celia Flores and all those who are currently in U.S. concentration camps will be freed, inshallah, because it's the right and just thing to do.
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. And I kind of want to talk about a little bit, the response from the young communists and just young people, generally in Cuba, who said in response to these growing US attacks that this is their Bay of Pigs. I think there is maybe a notion that the revolutionary ideas are something that were held from the older generation, but it seems as though the younger generation is even equally as steadfast in their ability to fight back against these attacks and struggle for the revolution and struggle against empire.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah. I think that that's a legacy of Fidel doing this promise of, preserving the revolutionary consciousness of the people. And we see that with our Cuban comrades, they have been able to, ensure that that revolutionary consciousness is something that is passed on generation by generation by, being transparent about the responsibilities and the duties of, defending a very honorable feat or a very honorable merit, because to be able to ensure that no one within your society is suffering off of something that is manufactured just to increase the wealth of a small pool of people, and having that clarity that socialism is the political practice and economic practice that ensures that this social injustice doesn't happen. And if you want to participate in other, spiritual practices, which is a conversation that I think would be interesting to engage with Cuban comrades to talk a bit more about that. And because of the sake of time, we probably won't be able to get into that today. But I think that this is why Cuba has been able to remain, steadfast and determined. That if the United States does try anything, then they will learn again that through their failure in the Bay of Pigs, that Cuba is not to be messed with, and she will defend herself because she is not alone. And that is because the people of Cuba are directly entwined with the Cuban Revolution, and the government and the people move together as one. There's no separation. So I think because of that resolve, that's why if they try again, what happened in Playa Giron will be the result, because Cuba will not lose, inshallah. Cuba and the global resistance movement against imperialism, we will be victorious.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think that victory portion is a huge part of it, right? How can we be victorious in our struggles, in our movements, in our ability to defeat the imperialist pigs, right? I think sometimes there's the assumption that the empire is too big and that the imperialists are out of our reach. But when we look at places like Cuba, and when we look at places like Venezuela, and when we look at places like Iran, and all these places that perhaps are facing attacks from the US, we can also see that these are the countries that actually defeated the US, right? These are the countries that actually have been the strongest and most steadfast in their ability to not just reject US imperialism, but ensure the US has stayed out of their society. And so talk to us a little bit about that, like um, what the resistance that is happening, why is it so important for us to realize that it's material and it's not just heady, right? It's not just in theory, but it's something concrete. And what is our responsibility here in the Imperial Court to kind of support that and perhaps push back against any propaganda that may be happening towards this material resistance?
Yeah. I say this quote quite a bit because I think it stuck with me the most, but the apostle of the ongoing Cuban Revolution, Jose Marti, essentially said, like, hacer es mejor que decir, like, to do is better than to say. So I think it is, like, mashallah, one of the most beautiful things since having, like, the enlightenment of gaining revolutionary consciousness, to know that it's something that comes from, like, actually helping with the material and changing the material conditions. And it can't just be like words that we say with one another, because it won't actually bring about material change. I think that the responsibility that we have within the Imperial Core is to continue being in material solidarity with liberation movements, with self-determination movements, and resistance movements, right? Because this is the way that we essentially all collectively become free. And in the sense of us, continue to challenge, like, the economic blockade, and then now the intensification of the oil blockade caused by the imperialists. We have a duty here in the Imperial Core, because we're in the belly of the beast, to do whatever it is that we can, but also following the leadership of, the revolutionary Cuban government and the militant people of Cuba. And whatever they ask of us, it is just a question and an answer of being ready, but following that guidance, and also guiding one another as well. And I see that our comrade, labeled as National Network on Cuba, I imagine that Cheryl has been able to join us. So thank you so much, Cheryl, for being here. And we were just talking a bit about some questions that we had in regards to what's happening in Cuba now, and we know that you actually just returned from Cuba with Nuestra América Convoy. So I guess before we get into that, talking a bit about that, if you want to introduce yourself to the folks on the call, and then we can get started.
Hi, I'm Cheryl Labash. I'm one of the co-chairs of the National Network on Cuba, and I was part of the delegation, the flotilla, that recently was in Havana, Cuba, to bring material aid and bring the solidarity of the world movement to the people of Cuba. Right now, I'm in downtown Detroit driving with a friend of mine who has relatives in Cuba that I visited while I was there.
Amazing, amazing. Well, Comrade, we know that you mentioned that you just returned from Cuba with the Nuestra América Convoy. For those who were able to follow along, tell us a little bit more about what the convoy was, the goals of the convoy, and some of your experiences while you were a part of the convoy as a participant last week.
Well, right now, the convoy started out with the idea of a flotilla, and based on the Gaza flotillas to break the siege of Gaza, some of the people who were on the Samud flotilla were also involved in planning this, and it started out as a ships, but it really became impossible to do that in a big way, like the Gaza flotilla. And so it morphed into a convoy. And there were some between 600 and 700 people who came from all around the world to convene in Cuba to break the blockade. People came with all kinds of material aid, with solidarity shipments of solar panels, of medicines, of food, all kinds of things for the Cuban people, for distribution to hospitals and community-based organizations that work day to day to help the Cuban people resist. So we were to convene on March 21st there. So I traveled on the 19th. Other people, there was a charter flight with 170 people that came on the 20th to participate on the 21st. There were delegations from many different organizations, everybody united to say, let Cuba live. That people stayed at the Martin Luther King Center. Of course, the main the delegation that I hooked into was at a hotel down in Old Havana. And there's been a lot of chitter chatter by the right wing about how you stayed in a fancy hotel, blah, 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 without any regard for the fact that the US government prohibits people from the United States from staying in most of the hotels in Cuba. And the only hotel that could accommodate that many people was a hotel that was not on the list of prohibited, and it's a Spanish hotel chain.
Yeah.
But we did many things. Painted a mural. I went with somebody from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, who has a sister city with Matanzas. And we brought 4 duffel bags of aid that was assembled by a nonprofit in Pittsburgh for us to take with us. And we had to work out delivering that to Matanzas, which was quite a feat.
That all sounds, very beautiful, to the fact that this and the difficulties, and the constant pestering nature of the far right, of, as you highlighted, like them creating the conditions of, whenever like U.S. Tourists or anyone go into Cuba, there's like so many restrictions in regards to like where we can stay, what hotels can be supported, and I remember also hearing that this is because the U.S. has, like, tightened the allowance for oil, into Cuba, but that oil has been prioritized to going into these hotels, because they're either private or they're under the clause of what's allowed and not allowed, due to the unilateral coercive measures. But despite that, as our comrades went to drop off the vitally needed aid, we were not we, I mean those who were there, but in the spirit, those who were stuck in the belly of the beast were also with our comrades, who were there to express solidarity during the convoy. We're still standing in unity and solidarity to make sure that these delegations and moments of community are able to come about, to be in solidarity with Cuba, especially at this time. So I guess, the next question that we had in mind to ask is, like, if you could talk more about, like, the significance of being alongside the delegations, from across the U.S. and around the world. Like, what does it mean to see that level of international solidarity arriving in Cuba at this time?
Well, I should have actually started my intervention by raising that there are two of the sailboats that were traveling from Mexico to Havana have gone missing, and there are 9 sailors from various countries who now are the Mexican Navy, and all are really trying to find them. So it really, one thing about Cuba, and one thing that gets missed in the U.S. corporate media, is that Cuba is love, and it's solidarity, with the whole world. That was really brought home in seeing all people from various countries who had come together. We met at the convention center, and for comrades who've been to the convention center from a second, what that huge hall looks like, and it was full of people from many different countries, with banners and flags, showing their solidarity, being welcomed by President Miguel Diaz-Canel. And then the next day, we were invited to come to the Cuban Institute for Friendship of People headquarters. And again, it was a huge delegation of people from all around the world. We heard from David Adler, was the lead person in the flotilla from Progressive International, and also from Manolo de los Santos from the People's Forum in New York City, that had been raising $500,000 to buy solar panels and solar generators, all the equipment to get them attached, to speed up Cuba's transition to solar.
That's right. That's right. Well, Cheryl, I know you talked about, you touched a little on the aids that was organized as a part of the convoy. And really the aid was a huge part of, defying this inhumane blockade. Because the United States, as we know, it's not just that they don't want to trade with Cuba. They don't want anybody to trade with Cuba or anybody to bring any kind of support to the Cuban people. So tell us a little bit about this aid effort and the Cubans' response to it. How did they, feel when they saw folks bringing in aid from every corner of the country and every corner of the world that they arrived from to the island?
Well, extremely well received. The material solidarity is one thing. The other part is the love of the people around the world for Cuba that was expressed. It was really a boost to the people in Cuba who are suffering tremendously from this oil shortage. It's hard to even imagine some entity saying, "Well, we're going to cut off all the fuel that comes to your country and try to force you to submit to our rule." I don't think that it's widely enough known across the United States that this is what's happening. They've denied that there's a blockade, and now they're admitting it and saying not only are we going to create this blockade, we're also going to prevent you from having electricity. We're going to prevent you. And people very much welcomed the solidarity as well as the material aid. But the solidarity and the fact that Cuba is not alone it's essential. And everything that we do in the United States, hopefully people are going out to the No Kings demonstrations with signs about Cuba now to make sure that people understand what the United States is doing and demanding that Cuba be unblocked, that we let Cuba live, that we support oil to Cuba. Not the United States is saying we're allowing oil to go to Cuba, but only to private entities. They're trying to divide the Cuban people from their government. The government and the people of Cuba are one, not this ruling entity like we have here in the United States, where there's billionaires and there's people living under bridges. The hardships are felt by everyone in Cuba, government officials, people from ECAP, the transportation, lack of transportation, people walking long distances. And also the other thing that's not known is what the Cuban government is doing to help alleviate those, to reorganize so that doctors can get to the hospitals, so that education can go on. Diaz-Canel had a recent interview where he talked about many of these reorganization that is helping alleviate pressure of the blockade. But it's not enough. We have to demand that they not attack Cuba militarily like they did Venezuela, like they did Iran, but that the oil blockade really be lifted and the whole blockade ended.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah. I think you said it best that the Cuban government and the people are one. They move as one, and the demands are to bringing an end to the blockade, but also bringing an end to the military, the U.S. military attacks against Iran and the genocides that both Washington and the illegal entity of Israel are imposing on the people of Palestine, Sudan and Congo, and the release of, a democratically elected president, Maduro, and first combatant Celia Flores, and the complete removal of Yankee intervention in these nations. And as we see, right, from you touched a bit about like the demands that came out of this, the participation of member orgs on the convoy, but also from our Cuban comrades. So I guess we wanted to know if there's like any other word from other comrades that participated in the Nuestra América Convoy. And as we unfortunately saw some of our comrades being, kidnapped and held upon returning back from Cuba. If you can tell us a bit about like this repression as we've seen thus far, but also like what should be our militant response to this, despite what the Yankees want to impose on us, if that makes sense.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. The People's Forum delegation, which had these great T-shirts about how solidarity cannot be blockaded on their T-shirts. They were the first ones who encountered harassment at coming back into the United States. And then the following day, I think it was Wednesday, a delegation that had traveled with Code Pink faced the same kind of harassment at the border. They were taken into secondary, their telephones were kept. Many of the people had also participated in solidarity with Palestine in the past. There were notables like the podcaster Katie Halper and Chris Smalls, the labor leader who helped us win the first election at Amazon, were among the people who were detained. And they were essentially detained. And if you have a U.S. passport and you land in a U.S. port, they can harass you, they can take your phone, they can delay you, make you miss your connecting flight, but they have to let you in. And that's an important thing to remember. Also, the Venceremos Brigade and the U.S. contingent, the Mayday Brigade, all take this security very seriously and make preparations so that no one is surprised and no one is left alone. There's a lot of solidarity between people who go on delegations and legal preparation ahead of time. It's just one thing that we risk. We don't have the same risk as our brothers and sisters who are migrants and have to worry about ICE in airports and around the corner all the time in U.S. cities. The fact that we carry that blue passport gives us, it's not ultimate protection, but it certainly will allow us to sit there at the airport, and eventually they will let us go because it's too expensive to keep us too long. So the main thing is, do not be afraid or deterred from going to Cuba. There are many opportunities coming up to go to Cuba. The best, of course, is to go with the Venceremos Brigade or the Mayday Brigade to make sure that your delegations are prepared and organized. And that is your best defense. But the main thing, too, is to be out in the street. Make sure that you take pictures of your events. Make sure that you go to the U.S., to the media. really demand, now is the time for us all to go out and demand that elected officials have to sign on to this legislation to end the blockade, and that we will not take an action, that they have to act. They have to speak up for Cuba. We demand that, and we'll show it in the streets. So, and we'll show it in the material aid being collected. One thing that's not getting a lot of publicity is the Actions for Cuba committees that are really becoming the funnel point for the heart of people in the United States who want to support and show solidarity with Cuba. So those are all things that are coming up, and we will continue to struggle on every single level, in Congress, in our communities, with our city councils, in our labor unions, in our neighborhoods and block clubs. Every place we are in our communities, Cuba needs to be raised. If you haven't talked about it before, we have to talk about it now. And also, we very much appreciate the three comrades who are doing this wonderful podcast. And thank you so much for doing it.
Thank you, comrades, and thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate it. We appreciate the work that you do, the words that you have, and just the badass dedication that you've dedicated to the Cuba Solidarity Movement. Cheryl is an incredible revolutionary woman. And so thank you so much, comrade, for joining Revolution Within the Revolution. We appreciate you a ton.
Yes, yes. As Comrade Armia said, we do appreciate you a ton, and we appreciate, the words of affirmation and the words of wisdom, because you have been, and knowledge as well, knowledge and wisdom as well, because you've been in the struggle and solidarity with our Cuban brothers and sisters, and in the resistance movement for a very long time. So inshallah, hopefully we can continue the conversations to gain more guidance and strengthen our resolve to continue pushing onward until victory, because our Cuban comrades, the world, we all deserve to live in a world where we are respected, and we're not faced and forced to defend ourselves against constant injustices, because as we know it, it's a small pool of people who continue to do all of the evil in the world for their own benefit at the cost of everybody. But thank you so much for being on today's call, and then also for helping us put everything into place and being prepared, because as you said, it is better to be prepared than scared, and hearing from our elders allows us to be able to do that.
Words to live by. Be prepared, not scared.
Yes, indeed.
Thank you so much. So yeah, I think that brings an end to our segment in regards to Nuestra América Convoy. And thank you so much, Comrade Cheryl, for sharing back as to what happened during the week, the significance of this, and why we have to continue doing the work. And the revolution within the revolution would not be the show as it is, of having revolutionary women and femmes talking in regards to the work that we're doing. And this is something that we're going to continue next week. And I think it's actually going to be our last segment on the show, which I'm sad about, but we'll continue being in community and discussion with one another. But next week, we're going to be wrapping up with talking about the family code and women in the Cuban Revolution. And we're going to have an interview with our comrade from the Cuban embassy, who is the deputy chief of mission of the embassy, Taneris Diegues. And she'll be sharing a bit and answering some questions that the three of us, I think, have about, the family code, the continuation of the Cuban Revolution, and the participation of women, and why this is, the driving force of the revolution, this participation. And we are also asking folks, as Cheryl mentioned, to continue supporting the Action for Cuba committees as we are putting together a car caravans for Cuba, which is also a legacy of a historical, act of solidarity that comes from IFCO and Reverend Lucius Walker, who, put caravans together to defy U.S. unilateral coercive measures and efforts to, isolate Cuba, as we see, is very futile. And this is something that we do not allow to happen, and why we are launching, the Caravans for Cuba to bring very vital material aid that we've been able to gather due to efforts that have spanned for a few months now. So this will be the culmination of all of this, organizing effort and solidarity with Cuba from comrades and organizers within the belly of the beast. And we have in different locales, there are a bunch of events that are being planned, like teach-ins, cultural events, film screenings, and we could plug to follow up with those events on the National Network on Cuba, on the Instagram and Facebook pages, but also checking in with the Action for Cuba committees that have been tagged, one of them being NYNJ, Action for Cuba Committee, also I'm forgetting, there's quite a few, Nashville for Cuba, Philly for Cuba, I think the Florida would be VB for Cuba, Florida, but we'll share all of the links with folks. And we are also continuing our solidarity efforts of being united with the Bolivian Revolution and adhering to the demands of the righteous people, of calling for the release of Presidente Maduro, Nicolas Maduro, and first combatant Celia Flores. As Comrade Amia said, there was a sham second hearing that happened here in New York City, and instead of continuously forcing them to be in judicial processes that are not fair or even have any legal grounds, to come underway, we just want the full release of our comrades, but in a larger demand as well, the release of all those who are in U.S. concentration camps, as we see with ICE detention centers, and then also just the for-profit prison complex that is here in the belly of the beast. And this is all rooted, as we see what happened, the attacks that happened in Venezuela to hold unregulated and illegal control over their oil reserves. The imperialists attempted to do a regime change, which has been futile, and Iran has been defending the Islamic Republic very well, and coming to the defense of the resistance movement on that side of the region. We within the belly of the beast do not want war in Iran. We don't want war or genocide anywhere, and we also don't want those who are forced to join, the military services and be imperialist soldiers to essentially die for a war that is pushed forward by the billionaire Epstein class. And as Comrade Cheryl mentioned, they live in mansions and we have people living under bridges. So the fact that there's enough money for war and not to feed the poor, this is something that, is something that should be called attention to. And it's a part of our ongoing demands of ensuring that justice and peace is able to reign in the world, and not war and devastation. And then the last plug that we have is for those who unfortunately missed the cutoff to apply and be able to go on this upcoming brigade for May Day, that you apply to the Venceremos Brigade and National Network on Cuba's brigade, which is in honor of the centennial of Fidel. And those applications close on April 15th, and you should be able to find the application link in a post that was shared on National Network on Cuba's Instagram, but also on Facebook and YouTube in the description here. And yeah, we would love for those who are willing to be in full material solidarity with Cuba to go, and understanding that this is not a tourist trip, this is a political trip, in a full act of solidarity and unity. And we are there to learn from our Cuban comrades and to learn about the Cuban Revolution and be in support of their ongoing socialist project. So with that, it is a lot of calls to action, but as we've said, we would like for everyone who joins us and all the organizers and comrades within the belly of the beast to move with discipline and militancy. So that means staying up to date and also checking in regards to how we can bring about these demands to come into fruition and actualization. So thank you all so much for joining us today. And yes, we hope you can join us next week. And if you're able to continue helping us with our fundraiser for Peoples to Peoples exchange, so that we can send our comrades to Cuba, but also send much needed material aid alongside the charter plane that will be going out with the aid that we gathered from the Caravans from Cuba campaign. So thank you all for joining us. Thank you, Comrade Amia and Comrade Cheryl, for being on the call today. And yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all. Power to the people.
Power to the people, always. Pa'lante, siempre pa'lante. Bye.